Good morning. My name's Simon Wright, and I'm joined by Martin Percival, the CTO of the commercial team here in the UK. I lead a team that works with customers to help them transform by leveraging the Red Hat culture and the offerings that we have. And the goal of the next 30 minutes is to explore why and how so many customers are trying to transform right now, and why leadership should look to change their company culture in order to increase their chances of succeeding. So before we go ahead, let's have a quick look at what this mystical word transformation means. And I particularly like this definition. There's two parts to it. The first explores how organizations are fundamentally changing how they operate and deliver value to their customers. And I think this comes from when you're at the top of your game, that's the time to change it. And they're using digital technology to do at least three things. One is to automate the processes and how things work and their systems, to use analytics to really get a better view of what their customers want and how they can deliver it. And also, there's a huge lot of data out there. It's how they can collect that data to be used in the best way. The second part explores this cultural change. And this is where it gets a bit uncomfortable. This is changing the status quo. This is experimenting. And this is getting comfortable with failure. Most of us are uncomfortable. Certainly I work with a utility company, and when we mention failure, they get a bit uptight, because that normally means that half of Salford has a blackout. But I think it is about experimenting and getting comfortable with it. When I look back, learning to ride a bike is impossible without falling off. And quite a few of us in our 40s and 50s, now we've gone to clipping pedals, have done exactly the same all over again. It's how we learn and how we move forward. And I think failure at that level in terms of learning is probably a lot less risk than doing nothing. And I've seen a lot of companies over the last few years do nothing and go under. So let's explore the business basics of what we're looking to do slightly further. And it all starts with the customer. Customer has challenges, they have demands and wishes, whether that be business to consumer, business to business, or even internally. Internal customers inside large organizations. So we look to get feedback from that customer. And think of products here in its broadest sense. This includes both the choice of products and how we present them to the customer, the speed and time with which they're available, and also how people transact. And now we're very, very concerned about how these are made in a way that doesn't damage the planet and is fair to all the people inside it. So once we've decided what changes we need to make to the offering, that's where we have a stab, have a hypothesis, and go to development to look at how we might change the offering and take it to market. We then look to see how we deploy that, and operations get the tough job of then making that available in a robust and reliable way to our customer. You see tensions here very quickly. If you look at the white triangle here, this is really around differentiation and speed. Whereas in the grey triangle, we're more interested in scale and reliability, scalability, and security. And the tensions between those two is really where we look for these two people to come in. Architects to give an oversight and to reduce the complexity within our systems, and their leadership to provide that vision, almost create that environment within which these other five elements can actually perform to their best. So I'd like to hand over to Martin now to explore what's happened and why so many organizations feel they're now in a place where they can transform.
Thanks, Simon. Before I start, I thought what we should do is kind of look at an analogy of some of the stuff that affects us in our normal lives. Many of us have heard the kind of old tale that every seventh wave that comes onto a beach is a large one. And that feels to be a kind of truism, because we've all walked along the beach, along the shoreline, and been soaked by a wave that's bigger than we were expecting. In reality, science has proved that that's not true. Waves come from all over the place. The wind blows many different directions. Some of them come from deep water and are very much larger and longer. Some of them are very much shorter and quicker. And what happens is that they build up. They do lock in step with each other, and something called a wave train forms. But sometimes you get subtraction and sometimes you get addition, and so you get a large wave. And the same is true of technology. Technology, some of it moves very slowly, some of it moves very fast, but every now and again we get to a point where all of those things coincide, and we get a kind of step change in the way that technology can affect our lives and can help us change the things for the better as well. When I started out work, it was back in the mid-80s. Hard to believe, I know. But at that point, mainframes were really starting to give way to microcomputers and mini-computers, particularly due to the use of very large-scale integrated chips. Intel had gone about and just released the fabulous 286 chip. A little company called Acorn in the UK had released an architecture for a chip called the Acorn RISC machine, and they used that in their home computer. But at the same time as chips were changing the world, modems also got to the point where they were useful enough to take home and start to connect into those systems. And so that made it possible for you to be able to move your data center from your own offices, your own buildings, out towards a more managed system, managed service place to do that. And all of that really drove a change in the way that architectures were built around it. And we had the beginning of what we used to call the client server era, where everything connected into those large servers. Of course, as you look at things evolving over time, many things have changed in the course of the years. But about 15 years later, when we got to the late 90s and the early 2000s, more of those long waves came forwards. And we got to the point where there were perhaps, more ubiquitous use of the internet. The protocols around TCP/IP had certainly spread around the world. We got through the Gartner hype cycle for the internet, so it reached its peak and then came crashing down into that trough of disillusionment. And trust was starting to build that the things we were doing in the internet were actually worthwhile at that point. And we also ended up with good enough network speeds as well. So all of those came together to really drive more of an acceptance about how we went forwards. Of course, at the same time, in the software space, Java EE standards came out. So Java was a growing language in popularity. The Enterprise Edition made many things very much easier for people to use and to build. And those often got combined or did get combined into application servers, which brought together all of that goodness into one bundle. So you could write your applications very quickly and deploy internet-facing applications for the first time very fast. And that made the growth of the internet sort of take off as well, because we could support that. Underneath it all, at the hardware level, commodity virtualization came along, built into the into the x86 chips at the time, and certainly the ones made by Intel and AMD. And if we look at the way all of those things combine, they all mix together to produce a sort of move forwards at that point. Underneath it all, we often see changes in the architecture, like I said, with client server. And at the time, we were just starting to play with service-oriented architectures and try to understand how we could link our IT and our business together for the first time, really. I've put a dotted line around this because there are some challenges to that. And that's what we often see, is that technology can drive us forwards, but there are times when we have to work round bits of it, sometimes when we can't make that work properly. One of the reasons for that was that fabulous virtualization that had come about enabled us to scale out within a single large chip. We could use that power and get much better density in there on that chip. But what we tended to do was use those application servers to build a single big application that would be put inside a virtual machine, and then we'd scale it at the VM level. And you'd connect into that from your router and the internet beyond that. And the problem with that is, of course, that if you wanted to get to an individual service, you had to spin up an entire new copy of your whole application server. And that was somewhat slow, somewhat hard to get going in the timescales that you might need if you really wanted to react to the way that the world was changing. Having said that, a lot of the applications that were built at that time really brought about the growth of the internet, and so have been super successful for the companies that got their heads around it, and really drove that next few years, next 10 years maybe, of the way that applications were able to scale out and cope with the business demands we were putting on them. Of course, if I want to take this thesis further forwards, coming up to 2015 to 2020, that sort of thing, we again see a change in certain aspects. Some of these have changed dramatically. Some of these have changed slowly and have just finally caught up with us. If you look, obviously, in the public realm, there's much more acceptance of us using public cloud services as individuals. But not only that, the public cloud is a much more powerful place for people who want to build applications and use some of the services that are now available from those providers. Simultaneously, we all carry around mobile phones. Back in the sort of mid-'80s, as I said, Acorn came out with that chip. Who knew that that was going to become the ARM chip that powers almost every single mobile that's out there? That's a long, slow wave finally reaching potential. And if we look across the way that technology has changed underneath that, of course, there are software changes too. Open source, you could argue, is primarily responsible for the way that the public cloud has grown and the services that we find in there, because almost everything is built on Linux. Almost everything uses open source to solve other particular problems in there. But more than that, we've seen open source grow up in areas like artificial intelligence, in things like blockchain. And, each one of those has ways that it interacts with services that are being provided by the public cloud, but also provide service in their own right to other people. Underneath all of that, there is if you like, a software movement in the same way as the application server. Containers have come through as being a software enabler for the way that we write and deliver software into solving all of those particular problems. And again, of course, underlying, again, all of that is a hardware type solution where 5G is driving new mobile speeds. Edge and IoT allow us to connect to the systems that are out there in the physical world where we really didn't have a way to talk to those properly before. And the GPU, the graphics processing unit that was originally built into graphics cards for us to play games with, has become the driving force in how artificial intelligence is used. And so, again, is a terrific change in the way that its original premise came about. Right down at the very bottom of that layer is the idea that we can now take those services from the service-oriented architecture and we can start to build them out into microservices. And by using the power of containers, which really allow you to combine the way that you write code, the way that you deploy it, and the way that you manage it, and also how you physically get that onto the chip and running, allows you to build out microservices that are suddenly capable of being spun up, spun down, and managed in their own life cycle at a very much faster rate than we used to have before. If you look at that architecture, obviously you can connect all those container-based microservices together. And the kind of new applications that we're seeing as a result of that architecture are the ones that are changing the world at the moment, the ones that are really driving forwards young new companies. Many will get to this point and probably won't go any further. They'll have this as their front end, they're a unique startup, and this is how they've built their application. But as they scale, they'll find that they need to change the way that they manage those microservices because they enable, but they also get in the way sometimes. You have to be able to cope with them at scale. How do you do that? So again, Kubernetes has come around as a piece of software that allows you to really manage the scale and life cycle of those containers. And you might stop there, as I said. You may never go any further than that. But if you're a company that's been around any amount of time, it's likely that you'll have some of those VM applications still around. And the challenge for you in that space is, well, what do you do between those two? One is moving at one speed. One perhaps hasn't changed for a while because it's very stable. But at the same time, it's got a terrific amount of your business value locked up inside it. And so you want to maintain that business value as much as possible. Classically, we would just put an integration layer in and we would get those two talking to each other. And that's certainly a way that you can do things, but you're going to end up with a situation where the two worlds are moving at slightly different speeds. And you need some kind of gearbox in the way, if you like, to make those two play nicely together. Or you're going to end up with a situation where elements of the way you used to do things will infect some of the stuff you're doing in the new and vice versa. And that may cause a problem at a more business level. So how would we do it? What's Red Hat proposing to you as we talk about this stuff? We realized that Kubernetes was going to be a solution to some of these problems very early on, but we also realized that for the customers that we had, we needed more than just raw Kubernetes provided. So when we built OpenShift, we made it a bit bigger. We left some space and we put in things like logging and some of the other services that you really need as a business to be able to cope with what you're going on and what you need as you talk to your customers. And that ability to enlarge that single offering into OpenShift has meant that as we've talked to customers about their old VMs and about the situation they're now in, we've been able to think more creatively about how you could bring that into the world of containers. And so just a month ago, we announced to the world that we were going to bring out something called OpenShift Virtualization, and that's now available for you to use. It allows you to spin up your virtual machines inside a container themselves and to bring the management of those two environments together in one place so that you can start to build services that talk at a business level, certainly in the microservices space, but you're not leaving behind the virtual machines that you've always relied on before. I just want to leave you with a thought that goes back to those waves. If we look at the way that surfers ride a wave, obviously there are two ways things can go on a large wave. You can be at the top of the wave, riding it forwards, significant distances, and that's all good. But if you're at the bottom of the wave when it comes down, then you're likely to get dumped into the sand. And we've seen in all of those waves going back that I talked about there before, that there are companies that have got themselves onto the top of the wave and ridden those followers really well. And there are others that have kind of not done that and have been left behind somewhat by the wave that's passed them by. Often that's as a result of being able to connect the business world to the technology world. And there are challenges that come through, as I've shown you already, in every part of that. And that's an area that Simon is going to talk about now. How do you make those two play together?
So here's the scary statistic. 70% of digital transformations fail. And if you look at the reasons behind this, it's because businesses aren't prepared to change their behaviors. We have a team here we call the Global Transformation Team, and we've managed to pull together 4 key academics or authors really in this subject. We've got folk that wrote the Phoenix Project and the DevOps Handbook. And we asked them to set about looking at exactly this question. Why do organizations fail? And their first look, they came up with these 5 failures. So we've got preventing change, we've got building things that really don't matter, they're out of date, building wrong things and building things wrong. And then poor old operations, actually taking what's built and making it available in the right way to the customer is a challenge. Now, putting a positive spin on this, that gives us 5 opportunities to get this right. And just as we looked at previously the tensions between differentiation and scale, it's clear that these 5 elements, as we call them, have relationships and interdependencies. So we try to plot these interdependencies, and it comes back to differentiation and scale. Differentiation or change on the left here, balancing off with stability and scale. And on the other axis, we've got tactical balancing off against strategic. If we're going to make changes to the product, they need to be changes that are core to what we do as a business. We can only evolve at a certain speed. There are lots of ways to make money out in the world, but Red Hat doesn't have the resources, expertise, experience to go and play in those areas. We have to stick to the knitting and do what we're good at and evolve slowly. So again, it's that balance. And that is the key. And really where we want to pivot is at a place on that axis that almost lets us have our cake and eat it, lets us differentiate really quickly and take it to market and scale it in a robust way very, very quickly. So how do we do this? We call this giving a culture of openness. And really openness to us is probably best explained by our ex-CEO in his book, The Open Organization. So Jim Whitehurst, who now is the IBM president, he did a TED talk a while ago, and he went through his experience of leaving Delta Airlines, which was a very traditional company with top-down, and joining an open company, Red Hat. In Delta, he had to know more than anybody else, make decisions, so work out strategies, the objectives that would lead to those strategies, and often the activities that would lead to those objectives. And he would consequently go around the world with 2 really big wheelie bags full of all the information so he could make those decisions. When he moved to Red Hat, he put out his ideas and the changes he initially wanted to make. And the response surprised him because people actually answered and came back and said, actually, that was sometimes the wrong thing that you should be doing, or here's something you could be doing better, or just agreeing with what he'd done. After the initial shock, he realized that all these people were a lot closer to the level of innovation and the coalface than he certainly was. And there was merit in some of the suggestions put forward, which led to a better result. And he worked out really his job at Red Hat was no longer to know more than anybody, but it was to spot the right areas of innovation and change and give them the resources to be successful. Where does this come from? This comes from the open source communities and how Red Hat works with those communities. So Red Hat has no traditional research and development. Instead, we inject 4,000 developers into the 15 million strong global open source community. Now, if you think where the innovation is going to come from, how much innovation do you get locking 4,000 developers in a room and feeding them some inputs from marketing, as opposed to injecting into that huge community that are working on real world problems every day of the week? And there we're looking for those projects, as we call them, that are going to make big changes. So as containers come up, as Kubernetes come up, that's where Red Hat works out where they go into our overall strategy and ensures that we put the right number of developers and resource, and we steer that community and those projects into the right way of working. So we didn't invent this. We actually have just adopted it in the way we operate as a company, and it's the same principles. I think the two overarching ones that I've seen while I've been here in the 6.5 years is meritocracy, that all voices are equal and everyone has a voice, and transparency. We don't get delivered fait accompli. We actually get involved in many of the decisions the organization makes along the way, where they're pertinent to us and relate to us. So as I've been here 6 years, the number of people here, doubling every 3 years, has quadrupled. Our culture is as strong as it's ever been. And it's these 5 basic conditions that have helped us to actually maintain that culture and keep it strong. And again, if I compare a traditional organization at the top to an open organization underneath, these are the five levers, if you like, that we pull to ensure that we manage to maintain that culture. And I was thinking, do I do this? So I looked at actually putting this presentation together. And I think I do. If you look at transparency, the first thing I did when given this slot was to really pull together a couple of lines on what I was looking to achieve, what the goals were. So I took those to a management meeting a few weeks ago. We shared them, we kicked them around a bit, and we got to a stage where we were all happy with what it should look like. Now, inclusivity is an interesting one because everyone in that meeting had a voice. However, everyone doesn't have a vote. It was really down to myself and my manager to choose the best ideas and to pull out those points. Then we get to collaboration. My next job was to pull the first draft of the slide set together. And I went out to a few colleagues and peers and some senior people at Red Hat and went through a dry run. And I got their feedback and the presentation began to take shape. And really, you look at community as to why did that take shape? And that's around a shared purpose. Everyone I went out to dropped what they were doing to some degree over that 2-week period and made time to go through the presentation and made time and took the effort to give you the feedback. A friend of mine called Jim probably explained shared purpose in the best way. When they went into lockdown, Jim was keen to start eating more vegetarian meals. However, he wasn't the one that cooked. His wife was the person that cooked, and her idea was actually, with a piece of meat or fish, it's much easier for me to make a tasty meal. Unfortunately, his wife went to the doctor and found out that her cholesterol was particularly high. And his immediate advice was, you really need to cut down on the amount of meat that you're eating. Suddenly they had shared purpose. Jim found the recipes, acted as a sous chef, and his wife cooked. And all through lockdown, an hour and a half every evening, that's what they've done. They've now got a whole host of recipes they can cook. So shared purpose is really important. Adaptability is probably a bit harder to explain. It really is about communicating in a continuous fashion. And I think what's also important in that communication, or makes it continuous, is making sure that people work very closely together. I've worked in organizations that have a level of hierarchy. That means actually to go to senior people, you need to go through their PA or people that work with them. And that takes time on the way up, takes time on the way down. We don't work that way inside Red Hat. And actually, even just getting people to review my presentation, I went out to some VPs. I didn't have to go through their PAs. I could look at their diaries, I could schedule it, and they made time. And it's that closeness and that immediacy which is really important if you're going to be truly agile and you're going to make decisions and innovate very quickly. So, if I'm going to conclude, I'd really like to say that open source has a lot more to offer than the code, which is good and has changed the world. I think we can learn an awful lot from our culture. And certainly our customers have come to us and they've scratched their head and said, actually, we could do with a slice of Red Hat in our organization. We could do with a way of working much quicker and letting innovation rise up through the organization really quickly. And if you look at Red Hat, we've had to evolve. You know, we started as an operating system company. It was pretty simple. We'd help people implement it. We have many more products now. But more importantly, yes, people have come to us and said, can you share your culture? We've had to look and analyze what our culture looks like, work out what these 5 levers are, and change the offerings that we have in order that we can now coach leadership teams within other organizations on how they can create this environment using those 5 levers. We've had to coach people and enjoy coaching people on how best to work in an agile way, how to bring the business, the operations and developers together, and to start coding in 3 days, which is the kind of experience you get from our open innovation labs. And I think that's an area where we've also had to have more changes. We now aren't able to get people together. We have to work in a virtual way. And we're going to show you a video on how we've managed to evolve and do this. But before we show that, I'd just like to share that as a manager in Red Hat, I've been lucky enough to be invited onto several workshops on Black Lives Matter and several speeches. And something that stays in my head is something a lady said. She said, all change is uncomfortable. And if it's not uncomfortable, if we don't ask the uncomfortable questions and we don't hear the uncomfortable answers, then it's not really true change. What I'm asking you all to think of now is what that change looks like. And I'm asking you to be brave and try to do something. So thank you very much for listening. Enjoy the video and enjoy the other sessions that will follow on from this one. Thanks a lot.
I think any team can highly perform given the right tools and given the right autonomy to be able to succeed.
An Open Innovation Labs residency is an amazing immersive engagement where our customers learn how to build great products using Red Hat technology by pairing up customer engineers one-on-one with Red Hat experts.
We are different than any other vendor in the market. Red Hat is using open source principles to create communities out of individuals.
We use open source principles in practice to change the customer ways of working and deliver successful outcomes through our Open Innovation Labs residency.
We can tap into pretty much everyone in the open source community to be able to deliver exactly what you need. It's not where we're prescribed to a certain type of methodology. We use them all.
We don't live in the same environment that we used to, but we are still Red Hat. We are still Open Innovation Lab.
With Red Hat being experimental by nature, we iterated quite a few times to deliver what we call today the virtual residency.
The virtual residency enables customer teams to come together distributed.
We will definitely help scale up your people faster. You're gonna have a better team, a stronger team, working together to deliver better results.
All the residencies are structured around business outcomes, so we want to make sure that by the time we reach the end, they achieved something about accelerating, about improving architecture, and so on. But really the most important thing is about the culture.
It is about coming together and creating a long-lasting team, a high-performing team that's going to understand and solve every challenge that comes their way.
This is a spark within one team. People all of a sudden get excited and then they share. It's all about, okay, how do we do this different? How do we do it at scale? How do we now spread this fire that started as a part of the virtual residency? I think any team can highly